Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is the 2005 direct-to-video animated film, The Batman vs. Dracula. Now, this is actually a spin-off of the television series The Batman, which aired in, I believe, 2004, and I believe it ran for like 4 or 5 seasons. Now, I never watched The Batman, so I really can't compare this movie to the show that it's based on because I never watched The Batman, the show, because I remember when it aired, I was like 12 when the show started airing, and to me it just kind of seemed like a dumbed-down version of Batman the Animated Series, which I was already such a big fan of, and I guess at that age I just didn't like the idea of another Batman animated series that wasn't set in that same continuity as Batman the Animated Series, so I never really gave the show The Batman a chance, and from what I heard about the show, I actually heard it's not that bad. Like, I heard that it does kind of start out as pretty much like a dumbed-down version of Batman the Animated Series, but I heard that the show actually does get better as time goes on, and I believe actually Robert Englund actually played the Riddler in the show, played the voice of the Riddler, but I never watched the show, so since I've never watched the show, I can't really, compare this movie to the show that it's based on, because I never watched the show. I'm just gonna be judging this movie on its own. Now, what's interesting is this isn't actually the first time Batman fought Dracula. In the 90s, there was a graphic novel called Batman and Dracula Red Rain, which I recently did a review on, so you can go check out that review if you want, and that book actually had 2 sequels made to it called Batman Bloodstorm and Batman Crimson Mist, and interestingly enough, even those weren't the first time Batman fought Dracula. Actually, in the 60s, Andy Warhol made a movie called Batman Dracula, and after that, there was another movie called Batman Fights Dracula, but neither one of those were authorized by DC, so they're not considered to be official Batman movies, but apparently those movies exist. And even that wasn't the first time Batman fought a vampire. I heard that in one of the earlier Batman comics from the 30s and 40s, Batman actually did fight a vampire character in those comics. So interestingly enough, Batman does have kind of a history of fighting vampires. Now, since I never watched the show, I don't know when this movie's supposed to take place in terms of the continuity of the whole show. I guess the movie might take place after the events of the first season of the show, but once again, I wouldn't know because I've never watched the television show. So the plot of the movie is, it begins where the Penguin and the Joker escape from Arkham Asylum, and the Penguin heard about all this money that might be buried in this cemetery in Gotham City, so he goes looking for it, and he finds this coffin, thinking the money's in there, and he opens it up and finds this corpse in the coffin, and he accidentally cuts himself, and his blood gets on the corpse, and it actually reanimates the corpse, and it turns out that this was the dead body of Count Dracula, who for some reason was in Gotham City, and what happens is Dracula, he comes back from the dead and ends up hypnotizing Penguin to become kind of like his human servant, like kind of like his familiar, and what happens is Dracula starts turning different people into vampires, and what happens is, like, people start disappearing, and Batman ends up getting accused of these disappearances because one of the eyewitnesses on the news said it was a giant bat who was attacking this guy, so now people think it's Batman who's responsible for these disappearances, even though it's actually Dracula, and Dracula, he's turning all the citizens of Gotham City into vampires, and the plot of the movie is Batman now has to stop Dracula, and that's the basic plot line of the movie, but in the movie, the Joker ends up getting turned into a vampire as well, and what I liked about this movie is the movie does go a lot into the character of Batman and goes a lot into what his moral code is, because in the beginning of the movie, Batman actually thinks he killed the Joker accidentally. Of course, the Joker isn't dead and he ends up becoming a vampire, but what I thought was interesting is when Batman finds out that the Joker became a vampire, he actually captures the Joker and locks the Joker up in a cage and actually tries to cure the Joker of his vampirism. And the reason he's doing it is because he felt guilty because he thought he killed the Joker in the beginning of the movie, and even though the Joker's like his arch enemy, he still tries to save the Joker from this vampirism, because I believe Alfred says in the movie that it's a fate worse than death. And so, so even though the Batman does hate the Joker, he still tries to save the Joker, which I thought was really interesting. And the movie surprisingly does go a lot into the character of Batman, which this could have easily just been some cheesy little kids movie where Batman just happens to fight Dracula, but it actually does go a lot into Batman and Bruce Wayne's psyche, and it's actually a pretty dark movie. I know the show that it's based on, I heard this movie's actually a lot darker than the show that it's based on, and surprisingly, there's actually a lot of blood in this movie. It's still a kid's movie, like, it's nothing too bad, but there is actually a lot of blood in this movie, and actually, the scene where Batman's trying to cure the Joker of his vampirism, the Joker, like, starts screaming for blood because he realized that blood is almost like a physical addiction for the vampires, which I thought was really interesting, and it's actually kind of disturbing when you see the Joker screaming, begging Batman to give him blood, And what's interesting is I mentioned the graphic novel Batman and Dracula, Red Rain. Now, this movie is not a direct adaptation of that graphic novel, but it does actually take some elements from the graphic novel. Like, the vampires in this movie look a lot like the vampires do in the graphic novel Red Rain. But yeah, in the movie, there's also Vicky Vale, who is a character from the comics, and Vicky Vale, the voice of Vicky Vale is actually played by Tara Strong, who I know played the voice of Harley Quinn in the video games, like the Batman video games, and I believe she played the voice of Batgirl in, like, I know she played the voice of Batgirl in the movie Batman Beyond Return of the Joker and the movie Batman Mystery of the Batwoman. What I liked about this movie also is when Dracula is walking among the humans, when Bruce Wayne and Vicky Vale first meet Dracula, obviously they don't realize that it's Dracula and that he's a vampire, but when they first meet him, they actually find him to be kind of repulsive, which I thought was interesting because there seems to be this stereotype with vampire movies that whenever the vampire characters walk in among humans, the other human characters find him to be really charming, but in this movie, like, at least when Bruce Wayne and Vicky Vale meet Dracula for the first time, they find him to be kind of repulsive. I thought that was pretty interesting, but yeah, like I said, the Batman vs. Dracula, it is a pretty good movie. I would recommend it. I mean, it's still a kid's movie, but it's still a fun movie. I would definitely recommend it. And in the movie, the voice of Dracula is actually played by Peter Stormare. I think I'm saying his last name right. Stormare or Stormare. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but he's the guy who played the devil in Constantine, but he's a really good actor in some of the movies I've seen him in, and he does a pretty good job playing the voice of Dracula in this movie. So, yeah, that's my review on the Batman vs. Dracula, and bye.